attending festivals of 70,000 people and working in harm reduction and trip sitting here. And I'm also a consultant for the Open Society Foundation in subjects about psychedelic therapy and harm reduction.
Thank you. Lisa.
Yeah, so I'm Lisa, I'm from Germany. I'm on the path of becoming a licensed therapist, and I've been working in harm reduction. Harm reduction was kind of my start into the world of substances, where I basically found a kind of calling in working in psych care, so trip sitting. And since then, I've been going more and more into the work of working also on the kind of the flip side, addiction and treatment, but in more alternative styles, also using psychedelics and different substances to treat, to create well-being in people in general. And yeah, now in Germany, I'm continuing my studies.
Yeah, I will be good.
Great, thank you. If everybody can stay on mute, please. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa.
Sure.
All right, so we're really excited to go into these topics with everybody because our panelists have some overlap in their experience, but also really unique points and different cultural aspects to share with about these topics. One of the reasons that I was really inspired to make this panel is because we're living in a really unique time where there's all kinds of new stressors and unpredictable elements to everybody's life. And a lot of people are turning to any way they can to do healing and self-reflection to deal with all the new things that are coming up. And so I felt like there's different needs for people and different kinds of support are going to be needed for people who are doing work with psychedelics, especially because everybody is so isolated right now. So that brings me to my first question is, because there's a lot going on right now, both in the collective and for individuals, if people choose to take psychedelics at home right now, what are some of the unique things they may want to take into consideration given the current state of the world?
You said raggedy ass. That's gonna be raggedy.
Mohawk, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start us off. So I guess, coming from a strictly harm reduction perspective, to actually give a little bit more background about kind of how I got more into harm reduction and even some psychedelics uses. Basically, my story was that I was using these things recreationally, and I started to notice, hey, there's some healing potential here. And so I started telling all my friends about it before I kind of even ventured into the world of doing harm reduction in a more formal way. And so, a lot of what we were doing, a lot of what I was doing with my friends before that time is basically saying, hey, here are these psychedelics, here's access to them, and, this is how I think you were able to do some work with it. So, I kind of stumbled into this, and most of the time I was just kind of giving them just some basic information and, access to the substances at the time, and let them handle it on their own, because I'm no shaman, I'm no therapist, I'm none of those things. I just know a lot about how drugs work. And so, I typically told them about things like psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, and MDMA. But, with a lot of the work that I do with people who are in more recreational settings, clubs, festivals, things of that nature, it really depends on kind of what everyone's existing knowledge of psychedelics is. And I don't think a lot of people even know, depending on their experience, that there are different types of psychedelic or hallucinogenic type drugs. So like, I would, just like doing basic research to start before you even consider ingesting some of these substances. People are hearing a lot more about them in the media and on, through their friends, and, ketamine is now available, FDA approved, and MDMA, it's on its way. But those are two very different psychedelics, and what might be most most desirable to some people might not be for others. So, you know, I would say just when you hear about something, first do some research, because I've definitely had people come to me without even knowing what it is, because someone told them, oh, this is a psychedelic and, you know, you can use this. And everyone, you know, a lot of people's mind will kind of go to, oh, this could be used for therapy. You know, someone, you would want to know the difference between like DMT and 5-MeO DMT, which like a lot of people don't, or like 2CB and MDMA. So that's kind of like where I would get people started to even like understand what the drug is in the first place. And then therefore you can like inform yourself on dosing, and then you can start getting into more nuanced aspects of what taking that substance may look like at home. Because with something like MDMA, you're going to be a lot more in control of your experience, and you can still find some very positive results. But with something that might be a little less predictable, like mushrooms or LSD, or even more potent than that, or if you start getting more into like a dissociative territory like ketamine, people may not know what they're getting into. And I've definitely seen some people in certain settings, you know, in these settings when we do drug checking, which oftentimes Dance Safe and similar harm reduction organizations do. They'll do drug checking on site at events that we are set up in. And then we inform someone, oh, it appears that there's a positive result for this type of psychedelic when you actually thought you got this type of psychedelic. And you're just like, I have no idea what that is, but I'm going to try it anyway. You know, so we've definitely seen some people be like, oh, well, that didn't go as planned. Like they thought they had this idea that it was going to work a certain way and it didn't, just because they weren't very informed on it.
Yeah, it's really tricky too, because there's so much conflicting information online and conflicting advice from other people. What do you think, Gabrielle, how to approach this?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to always keep on track the information resources. And I think that one thing that is becoming kind of evident during COVID times, and especially like in terms of home use of psychedelics, is that many people have many questions about where to seek for information. And I've been working actually a lot with several organizations here in Europe who are building new projects and new sites where information is displayed, but usually people are not very well informed about how to reach them, or which one are them. And I think this is one of the first things. Beside that, of course, it's important to remember, I believe, that set and setting right now are also changing. Like, I think everyone in this panel, I guess, know the concepts of set and setting, like, you know, like how we are in the process of coming into the psychedelic experience, or the setting, the space, and that surrounds us in the process of the psychedelic experience. And I think during the COVID, these two concepts are changing. First of all, the set is definitely affected. We have been isolated. We have been with a lot of lack of contact. We have been in a certain way also confronting a lot of our own demons, a lot of our of our, you know, like deep reality in a certain way. And I think the set affected by this lack of contact and this lack of connection is also creating new patterns of drug use into the process of, you know, like how we use drugs at home, but instead of being able to actually like make proper integration with other people, or having people with us like taking the substances, many people are taking substances all by themselves. Actually, I'm coming today from a meeting here in Berlin. It's called the Berlin Psychedelic Meetup, in which something around 50, 60 people meet in a park, and they come to the front to speak about their experiences. And it's incredible to see how many people are right now taking substances at home, and how much they are experimenting with this process of being alone, of not being able to do it in groups. And in a certain way also renouncing to certain other processes as group settings, ceremonial settings. Um, I think this is very interesting. I think this is a process that can also empower people. In terms of the set, I believe that it can develop a new understanding of ritualization as part of the set experience. You know, like in how we come into the process by sacralizing the process ourselves, or just in a certain way, like understanding how we work in a deeper way, in a much integral way. Um, Beside that, I think that also connects with the setting, like the preparation of the space, how people are understanding the preparation of spaces of their own homes, of their own places where they can take psychedelics, and in a certain way also understand new processes of ritualization through home taking, you know, because at least in the psychedelic world, I think many people also, beside parties or recreational use, and a lot of people is now very involved in the ceremonial setting of the psychedelic world. And since this is not possible in these times, many people are experiencing their own ceremonial settings. And I'm very interested to hear, maybe later in the Q&A, about people who are doing this, people who have been submerged in the process of self-ceremonialization. And I think this is a very interesting phenomenon. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in terms of the question, I would like to kind of return to the idea of set and setting. Also in COVID times, definitely things are changing, and they may actually, these COVID will actually also put in motion many processes, I would say. But I would like to come back to set and setting, like what do we also mean with that on a kind of general scale. So set, so that's me, my what I bring to the table. That is how I'm feeling physically, that's how I'm feeling emotionally, how, you know, have I eaten, have I not eaten, all these kind of things, my personal history, and then the surrounding. And so home use, you know, what's your house, your room, wherever your home is your safe space generally. You know your space quite well. So there are certain things, certain kind of things that you can do to make psychedelic use in your space the most pleasurable, or the most whatever kind of intention you have. And I think that's why I think it's quite important to kind of talk about set. So what do you want to have out of this experience? What's the intention behind it? Is it because you feel kind of locked in your four walls right now, and you want to expand out of that, or you want to look into yourself, have more introspection, understand more of yourself inside? Do you want to just, you know, have fun and look at the world around you in another way? I think all of these kind of intentions behind it, they change the process in certain ways, and the needs that you have as well. So if you want to go into more of a therapeutic process, right now a lot of the media kind of boom around psychedelics is, you know, psilocybin cures depression, and we can use psychedelics in so many different positive ways. They create an expectation in people that you can kind of do autotherapy, which is also true. However, we have to ask ourselves a lot of things. Can I do this by myself? Do I need someone with me to go through possibly emotional turmoil? Can I do it right now? You know, in the times of COVID, is this something that actually would put me too down, too negative, or kind of too uncertain? You know, in times of uncertainty, using psychedelics can be quite difficult because it kind of shows you the plethora of the unknown. So we have to think about always what you want to do with this, and then what kind of yeah, changes to our setting we have to then do. I think, yeah, that would be.
And answering to what Andrew is asking,
yeah.
how are their experiences more risk and difficult?
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting, and I don't want to come into this, what Carl Hart called psychedelic exceptionalism, but I do think that there is definitely a difference between like what we see in the community of general drug users right now, how people are using drugs, you know, like in the lockdown, it's not necessarily the same as how people are using psychedelics. And I think this is very interesting too. Like I've been in contact with so many people from the community of Berlin and Mexico who have been using psychedelics in a very, yeah, in a way of, as I was mentioning before, like self-ritualization, trying to understand processes, as Lisa said, like about how they feel right now with the world, how the world is right now in the process of the lockdown and experiencing this crisis. And even like a very dear friend that I have who doesn't really take psychedelics, like some days ago, he called me and he told me like, I just took mushrooms and I would like to hear some words from you, like just to feel more calm. And it was very interesting for me to see that certain people like are taking this risk, but they are taking them, I think, in a kind of pretty responsible way. Of course, I couldn't be talking about everyone, but I think it's interesting to see this phenomenon of people empowering themselves into the psychedelic use.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Mohawk, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on kind of like what some follow-up questions might be. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat here. But I know that the types of questions that I tend to get, and this might start to answer some questions for other people, is like they kind of want like a template. They want like instructions and like, what exactly do I do? I've never done this, or I've never done it in this context. And honestly, like it really depends on the person. Just like Gabrielle and Lisa were saying, like it, you know, there's the mindset and the setting. And for certain people, maybe a certain mindset will just not be a good time for them. You know, like, are you super anxious about something? Like, I mean, for a lot of us, I mean, I'm calling in from New York City, and it could be extremely stressful time for a lot of people. There's protests every day. There's, you know, politics that a lot of people are just, you know, completely not in alignment with. There's, you know, this was like the worst hit area for COVID, and so people are feeling extra on edge about that. So, you know, for one person, they might be able to just kind of like overcome that discomfort in kind of what's going on around them outside of the walls of their own home. And for others, maybe not so much. But as far as like the setting, for a lot of people, it's like, I think you would kind of need to be able to recognize some of your own triggers and things of that nature. And I can speak for myself, where it's just like, I understand, like I've used psychedelics enough to understand that certain things will really weird me out. And it took a few times using psychedelics to even like discover that certain things weirded me out, because when I'm, you know, in like my normal state of mind, maybe I don't actually think about it that much. But a lot of these emotions can be amplified when you're on these substances, and also depending on the substance. Like, for example, you know, a wall in my apartment that normally looks fairly white starts to look a lot more of a red tone or something, or things that might just be like specks of dirt start to look like things that are crawling. So, you know, if you're like freaked out by bugs or something, you don't want to see things that are just like some, you know, innocuous spot on your wall or floor, and you think it's a roach, or, you know, something that's not even really, like maybe a smear that starts to look like blood. Things like that can like really like be very triggering. And a lot of times I tell people that they should start with a very light dose and see if that sits well with them, and like take some time, you know, after having experienced whatever dose they chose to start with, and maybe increase that a little bit more the next time. And there's a couple of different ways that you can adjust it so that, you know, it's easier for you or more accessible to you. I mean, there's like so many things that, like, you know, Gabrielle was saying about what are the informational resources that you can look up? I mean, I could probably maybe drop some in the chat, but there are some go-to, some things that I think that a lot of people would recommend, like Arrowhead and things of that nature, to kind of see what a lot of people are talking about. It has both the factual information, like just the pure science about a lot of these substances, as well as like there are trip reports, and you can kind of get a sense of how a lot of people use them and how their experiences go. But that's going to vary depending on the user and kind of the space that they're in while they're using it. And so like I always tell people to ease into it. Like there's really no urgency to like take everything at once. I know that a lot of times that tends to be the nature of the conversation. Like I see people online often making memes or making comments about, taking heroic doses, things like 5 grams or more of mushrooms. And, for a person who is lesser experienced, maybe they've had psychedelics a couple of times, but a lesser experienced person might not want to take a dose that high, not really understanding how much trauma they might have to re-experience, in their, during their psychedelic experience, or if something that normally wouldn't bother them in a lower dose is going to impact them. And there's a lot of people right now who are taking psychedelics but have been looking into microdosing. And for a lot of people, microdosing provides plenty of therapeutic value without having to, go whole hog and dive into something that they may not be able to easily come back from psychologically, because they're alone and taking it maybe in a setting that isn't the most ideal for them, just because we're very limited in where we can take this right now and feel like we're in a safe, controlled space.
Great, thank you. I think that Sara Gael is here. Are you here, Sara? I think she just entered, but I don't see her. Sara Gael is the outgoing director of harm reduction for MAP's Zendo project. She's entering a little bit late, but this is our moderator that we're really excited to have. Sara, are you in here with your camera on?
I am. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you. We were just wrapping up our first question, talking about special concerns for doing psychedelics at home. And yeah, I would love for you to jump in.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. So yeah, this next question that I will start with is that during this pandemic, people might be more likely to be using psychedelics alone. And one of the questions is, how can people navigate the balance of trusting their own inner wisdom and their own inner guidance with the need for maybe some more community support? And what are some factors like involved in this question? What are some factors that someone might consider if they choose to work with a guide or a sitter?
So you asked, what are some factors in choosing to work with a guide or sitter that
Yeah.
Someone who's new to this should consider? Okay. I mean, as a person who has had to step in and sitting a lot of people who I had no intentions on sitting, I would say, when people do have access to that resource, like definitely make sure it's someone that you trust, that you would feel very comfortable with. Someone who can, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like your best friend or something, but someone that you have a good feeling about, just like what we do with hopefully, anyone else we might be vulnerable around, like a doctor or a therapist. We want to, go to someone that we feel will have our best interests in mind when they work with us, a surgeon, anything, a lawyer. These people are supposed to be protecting your interests. So, obviously a friend would be a lot of people's choice, but you know, not every friend is going to be able to handle certain situations. You know, someone who can like ground you if anything were to arise. Someone who can also preferably remain sober during the experience so that they can be in good, you know, a good state of mind. I mean, maybe they don't, maybe if they can function in this certain altered state, like that's, you know, you'll have to really know that person well enough to feel like that would be the something that you'd be comfortable with. But I would, you know, for my own personal experience, I know that I'd want to be with someone who is not in an altered state. So I think that, you know, when it comes to at home use, if you have access to a friend, and I had some people talking with me during, you know, these times that we've all been kind of in isolation, but they did have a friend who they were comfortable having over with them, you know, who they, you know, were, they felt were negative for COVID and otherwise safe to be around. And that made all the difference for them being able to have that experience, even though they were in isolation. As for shamans or, you know, people who guide you through this process, I've had some people recently kind of asking, like, hey, who's sort of like legit when it comes to this type of thing? I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there who have done a lot of psychedelics or have done what they feel like is enough psychedelics. I feel like they can now like lead somebody else on this type of journey. And I think that that's something to be very cautious of, to definitely do some due diligence to, you know, make sure that these people won't somehow lead you astray or do something that could be harmful to you. I think a lot of people have good intentions with this and they're just extremely enthusiastic about spreading the word about what psychedelics can do, but not everyone is really, in a sense, like authorized, or even like they just don't have what bites require for someone to be in their care under these substances. And maybe Lisa can speak a little bit more to that as a therapist. So I'll pass the mic.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I definitely also wanted to touch that point where sitting and guiding, they're two very different things. So sitting is a person who's just there to kind of, you know, hold the space so that you know that you're fine if you need water, if you need, you know, to hold a hand. Guiding is, you know, is actually a person guiding your trip, and that's a whole different kind of ballpark. So it's very, very much the question, what do you want out of this? Do you want to kind of be in this for yourself, through yourself, with someone there just to kind of help? Or do you want in some way a person that will kind of create the trip with you, you know, kind of very impact a lot in the trip? And that there is a lot of, let's say, problematic facilitators out there, but that doesn't mean that, you know, it's any guide could be harmful. But I also agree that a lot of background checking, also talking to other people who've maybe already worked with the facilitator or guide, will definitely give you some kind of insight into what kind of work they do, how they work, whether it's good or not. And then also kind of your own feeling towards the person. Do you actually feel, you know, a good click? Because you will be in a state which is very vulnerable in the end. So there's also, you have to ask yourself, would I want to do it with a male person, a female person? You know, is the person in front of me you know, sensitive to different issues like LGBTQ community? Do I want a person of my same ethnicity? There's all these different questions that you can ask yourselves. Then there's also ways of interacting or having help that is not necessarily in the physical. So there's also things like TripSit, which is a page with a lot of information where they have chats. So you can also actually, if you manage to actually type in chat, but there are these resources available. And I think I actually would like to kind of go back also to the question, because it was a kind of two-part question that Sarah posed to us. What is the, how can we strike a balance between our inner intuition in this and our community network? And I think it's quite, inner intuition is something of a feeling. It's very difficult to describe. I think it can definitely be enhanced by what we have been saying is informing yourself a lot. A lot of education will also, an educated guess is definitely quite helpful in these kind of situations. And in terms of community and striking a balance is there, yeah, look what resources are around you. What is the community? Do you have people in the same city? Do your friends also use different substances? Do you have people to bounce ideas off of, or at least the person that you could, even if they're not sitting or guiding you, that you call a person or tell a person that you're actually going to do a trip by yourself? Because I think personal use, individual use can be amazing, and even experienced people might have some kind of issue throughout their trip. And so I think it's always really important that at least someone knows about what you're doing or planning to do. I think that's on my side right now.
Yeah, and I would just add this part about the I think accessing inner wisdom in times of COVID can also be a little bit equivalent to also accessing the community, because this is an exercise, and this is an exercise that we all have been playing in a certain way through internet access. Like, we have been coming towards resources and reaching out certain different communities in a process of informing ourselves. And in this process, we empower our inner wisdom. We are kind of understanding which are our communities, in which communities we feel safer, which communities are giving us the information that we need. There are so many approaches to psychedelic. Like, already in the group chat, I can see like a lot of people talking about trauma, about depression, about like, there are so many approaches about like what we are looking from the psychedelic experience. Some people only look for as someone wrote, like the enlightenment and the ecstatic experience. Some people is looking to fight off depression or to confront trauma, or some people is looking just to feel accompanied or feel something connected to their own spirituality. So I think the process of reaching out the different internet websites, different communities, is a process in which we're playing in both fields. We are connecting with our inner wisdom because we need to ask these questions to ourselves. What am I looking for? Why am I taking these substances? What is my intention? And I think at the same time, of course, we end up having a game with the community in which we are reaching out to people to explore their knowledge, to explore their ways of working, sometimes even like to ask them for guidance or for trip sitting. But I think it's a very beautiful process, because in that sense, we are connecting with ourselves, with our needs, and we are projecting them to our communities. I think, for example, that I was talking with Mike Margolis from X Symposia, now from Psychedelic Seminars, and we were talking precisely about this fact that in the US, many people use the psychedelic societies for reaching out towards communities that have their own similar, that share their similar practices on the psychedelic use. Here in Europe, for example, a lot of the psychedelic communities are built more towards strengthen information about safe practices, specifically which shamans or which practitioners are safe and which ones are not really safe. And I think that this also shows us that every culture is using this process in a different way, and every culture is reaching out information in a different way, because as every person and every culture, we all have different needs. And we are looking towards psychedelics for something different like between each other. And I think this is something that is going to start becoming more and more understandable in the process of the evolution of the psychedelic community, that there are so many different needs and approaches, and that we are just starting to connect the dots between them.
Yeah, thank you all so much. There's a thread that I'm hearing around looking internally, even when you're looking for someone to, say, sit with you or someone as a guide, to still be really reflecting and deeply listening and listening to your intuition around what feels right if you're choosing to sit with somebody. And this really is a time where a lot of people are choosing to do psychedelics alone and in a space where they might not have that opportunity. And Lisa, I appreciate you speaking to the piece around Zoom and how to, that using that technology as well as reaching out for support and reaching out for community support. And kind of brings up this question for me around what can community support look like. So let's say that it's maybe not just one individual that someone is reaching out to have sit for them. What are some other ways that people can help develop community networks and support around them for their experiences that may not just be one individual guide or sitter?
I think that this actually kind of like goes a little bit to what Gabrielle mentioned earlier, that he was coming from a meetup where people can come to the front and talk about their experiences in a group setting. And I've actually been seeing some of that pop up a little bit recently. I don't think that they're in person, but maybe some are. But as far as like what's come across my, my kind of networks, like as recently as this morning, is that there is a meetup, like an online meetup where people can basically talk through their psychedelic experiences in a space that's curated for queer and trans individuals. Like we were kind of talking about, like, do we want to be in a community of people who might match our ethnicity or some other identity? And for, as a queer trans person myself, like that is absolutely something that is important for me when I consider like who am I going to be sharing these experiences with, which can be extremely limited depending on where you are geographically. I'm in New York City, so there's going to be a lot of resources for a lot of things, and in Berlin there might be similar resources, but if you're in Kansas or something, maybe you don't quite have access to that. But the nice thing is that, with one of the meetups I saw, they have it set up so that, you can call in, it's virtual. So that means you can literally be anywhere as long as it works for your own schedule. And they had listed the times in Pacific Standard Time, the West Coast, and in Eastern Time. So it's like at least encompassing the US, this is a range of time that these people are able to talk through any, I'm not getting the sense that they want you to be on psychedelics while this happens, but maybe that, that might be something that people are providing space for as well. And I've seen this stuff circulating a lot on social media. And maybe some people are not super in tune with social media, and I understand that. So that becomes more difficult to scout out. But I've been seeing a lot of this type of support going around on like Instagram, maybe Twitter. I'm not really active on Twitter, but I kind of assume that anything that's on Instagram probably finds its way to Twitter and Facebook as well at the minimum. So I think that, if people have some sort of this like connectivity to social media, ask. Like, there's so much stuff online that maybe there aren't really websites for, because a lot of this is kind of like getting bucketed into things that are considered like community aids. So they're not like these nonprofit organizations or these, things with like this formal structure where you can go and find a website about them doing the stuff. A lot of times it's just a bunch of individuals who want to support themselves in their little sub communities and getting together to do this stuff without some sort of struck like formal infrastructure for it. And so, you know, I've seen a lot of that happening, especially specifically for COVID, because it definitely didn't exist as, at least as visibly before then. And I personally have not had access to any type of therapy for years, just because I knew that in seeking out a therapist, I wanted someone who could understand the type of experiences that I've lived through and need to navigate. And there's just, I'm not confident that a lot of people can provide adequate guidance with that type of thing. But then suddenly, like, there's lots of therapists available to do sliding scale or free, you know, Zoom therapy. And just so happens that the person I was connected to also has been trained to work with MDMA. So I was like, wow, I never thought I'd be able to find that. Like, this is a whole unicorn, and COVID has kind of opened people up to this idea that maybe we should be sharing these resources a lot more. So, you know, I would definitely even ask the panelists, you know, like, some of these questions are extremely broad, and you might be looking for something way more specific than we can cover, you know, in this session. So, like, I'm a public figure in the sense that, like, people text and email and message me online all the time. And I'm sure there's other people who don't mind offering the same. So just reach out when you see these seminars and you have more questions that you feel were not able to be answered, or you have very specific needs.
I think it's interesting to talk about community dynamics right now during the pandemic process, because I think in a certain way we are, you know, like, we are in a fine line, in a tense line also between personal responsibility and community responsibility. And what is happening in a certain way is that this process of the pandemic is showing us that we need to be able to navigate between these two processes, like our personal freedom, our capacity to share with others, our capacity to have certain experiences in which we can also, you know, like, go out to the park and kind of like understand which ones are your limitations, and until when you are crossing that line of responsibility towards your community. And I think this applies very well with the use of psychedelics too. In a certain way, we are also in the psychedelic world, we are also going through this process in which we need to navigate between personal responsibility and community responsibility, in which moments we need to pay attention to ourselves, and in which moment we need to pay attention to the other. And I think this happens a lot in ceremonial settings, in integration groups too. Sometimes in integration groups, in integration dynamics, it's very common that people focus in their own processes, and sometimes they discover that while they are supporting the process of the other, they are healing their own process. Sometimes stepping out for the community in a certain way is a way of healing ourselves. I think we are all going through difficult experiences, and I think the psychedelic experience has shown us that difficult experiences doesn't mean bad experiences. It's just a process that we need to go through to confront a part of ourselves, a part of our realities, and confronting this trauma in a certain way, because we are constructed by trauma. We also develop a sense of the trauma of the other, the trauma of our communities, of our surroundings. I think that in the processes of, you know, like in what people call the bad trips, we are sometimes also able to get out of our bad trips, usually through paying attention to the others. And that's something actually I learned from a shaman from South America. Like, he told me, every time that you feel that that it's too much for you, listen to the others, see how they are, and just really deeply connecting with their processes it's going to make you forget about yourself. And sometimes this is what we need. I think in terms of community dynamics, I really like what is happening in a certain way, that we are learning so much about how to navigate community responsibility through a pandemic. And I think this is a very good metaphor of our own navigation of the psychedelic experience.
So yeah, I think as we are here in this harm reduction panel, and it's quite difficult. I've been reading the chat a little bit. Harm reduction in terms of substances, as we've already said, the substances that we're talking about are incredibly varied. So if we are talking about DMT or LSD or mushrooms, each substance has its own kind of harm reduction necessities, issues, things to think about. So I don't know how much we will be able to get into very specialized harm reduction for each substance, because that's kind of too much for this panel. But we'll probably get into more, I don't know, best practices. I've just seen also to defining what integration is. So I think what is really important when we're thinking about the psychedelic experience, and when we're saying, okay, let's do at home use, and we generally think about best practices during, we actually have to think about really the before, the during, and the after. So before is the preparation, you know, so what do I do to myself and to my space to have the trip that I would like. So it can be, you know, eating well, meditating, doing sports, certain things that will make you feel good and be ready for the experience. Creating intentions is generally quite good to have a kind of guide or like a red thread for your own trip. Then during, it very much depends also on the substance, but things like preparing certain foods, like fruit is always really good to have. Having a music, a long playlist, you know, that can go on for several hours. There's even playlists that have been published from the studies that they're doing with MDMA that are, I think, 7 hours long, and you can find them online, freely accessible. And then there's the after. So that would be the integration. The after is basically, what do I now do with that experience that I had? It can be incredible experience. It can be a quite heavy experience. It can be, you know, many things at once. And it's the integration is integrating that experience into yourself. So that means, did I learn something from this experience? And if so, what is what I learned? And then can I now integrate, so make that an action into my life? Because maybe, you know, you realize that certain things in your life, certain habits you don't want anymore, or certain things you do want in your life, but only understanding that, you know, you want to make a change doesn't actually make a change. So integration circles generally help you to digest. It's kind of a digestion moment of, okay, so you know, I saw this, or I felt this, I understood this, and by being able to express it to other people, you may gain more understanding of your own experience, and also other people can have an input, although this has to be kind of taken with a grain of salt, because people can help you, people can have opinions, but also it's your experience, and they might not necessarily understand or be able to really empathize. So it is important, for instance, to go to integration circles where people kind of maybe have some more understanding of what you're going through. I also saw a question about whether unmoderated integration circles are useful for integration. I don't really have, you know, an answer other than my opinion, and what I've seen also is that it depends also on you know, on you. If expressing generally is helpful. However, you know, if the space is not controlled, some people maybe need more guidance, need more specific feedback to them, and not just kind of talk about their experience and then maybe have a chat with one of the participants later. I think especially when people are going into this on a searching for autotherapy, searching for some kind of, you know, treatment of something diagnosed, or at least something that is in some way problematic for them. I think there we need it's preferable to have more help. I definitely support the idea of that we can be our own healer, but not in a vacuum. You know, we can heal ourselves so much through our own of our own powers, but that should kind of be with other people around. So I think that the hype around psychedelics right now is leading many people to say, oh yeah, okay, I can now, you know, heal my treatment resistant depression, and I don't think that that's not true. But I do think that that people need some help and support throughout this process, because it's, you know, it's work. It's a lot of work. Even though the substances can help us, there's still so much to do and so much to confront. And it's not just a chemical reaction that is happening. It's you and your subjective experience trying to, you know, handle and harness the processes that are going on in your body, your mind, and your psycho-emotionality.
Thank you. There's one thread that I heard throughout there, that time around community and individual. And I guess I have a question around, when might someone be able to identify when they actually do need external support? Like, where might somebody say, you know what, I really do need to reach out and look for a group or a friend or community? Like, what might be some examples of when that might be really appropriate?
Well, I think it's like I'm still kind of thinking about the the question. However, generally, in any kind of things in life, it's about, crudely said, about functionality, about you know, when we feel like what we're doing is not actually having positive consequences in our life, like things are not functioning well, we are not I don't know, our mood is volatile or is going up and down, we are unable to kind of control ourselves, we're not, maybe not going to work or not being so productive in work. It's not all about productivity, but they're kind of markers that show us how we are kind of doing. If we are maybe having problems with within our friendship circle, you know, there's more conflict, you know, there's little things that are maybe showing that we need help. And yeah, I would say.
Yeah, like I remember when I was working in harm reduction in Mexico, I had a very specific subject of research, which was the so-called drug continuum, which is like this, you know, like this graduation in which we come from recreational use to problematic use to what, you know, like substance abuse. And it was really interesting to go into understanding which were the processes that defined each of them, because they were not necessarily defined by, you know, like there was not as like a very narrow and marked border. It was more like a process, and this process was precisely, as Lisa say, about usually functionality, like how our relationships affected, how is our economy affected, how is our capability to withstand difficult experiences, bad news, how is our capability of understand our own body, to connect with our own bodies? Is doing exercise being too difficult for me? Is eating well being too difficult to me? Like, I think there are so many, like little alarms that turn on and off in the process of understanding if we need or we don't need help. I think this has been, like, for me, one of the biggest questions of the psychedelic process, which is like the difference between precisely therapy, just, like sitting, and just accompanying and recreational use. And like, there are many people, there are many therapists. Like I've had beautiful conversations with therapists here in Europe who are very open to the fact that they truly believe that recreational settings can be even sometimes more therapeutic than therapeutic settings. And this is something that comes from the mouth of actually psychiatrists, like here in Europe, or maybe also in the US. Like, and for me, it's very interesting because I think we all have very different representations of what, like what psychological difficulties are and how to go through them. And I think for many people, it's very important right now to really understand in which moments the therapeutic possibility needs to be part of theirs, or in which moments they can administer their own processes. And I think there is no one answer to that. I think that this is something that comes.
And also, I would say, if you do have access, if you have the resources, if you have the possibility, it might sound a bit biased as a therapist myself, but help is not like you giving up. It's, you standing for yourself, standing up for yourself, and taking, doing therapy or asking for help is generally very beneficial, even if the alarm bells are still not ringing, or you are a generally quite well functioning person. It can still help you a lot. So it's not only when things go bad.
Totally.
Kind of a conversation around individual. So how can I care for myself? How can I do the preparation work, the work during the experience, as well as afterwards, to care and self-care? Where can I get support from my community, my friends, or community groups? And then another layer of where might I actually need to go out and reach for more professional or therapeutic support? And so I'm seeing it as kind of these like different tiers of experience, and being able to navigate, this is a time where I can really work with this experience myself. This is a time where actually it might be beneficial to reach out for that community support, and actually no, I'm having a really difficult experience, whether it's during the experience or afterwards, or with as Gabriel, as you mentioned, with maybe substance abuse, where people are actually getting into patterns that don't feel healthy for them, to be able to reach out and receive more maybe professional support. So one thing that is coming to mind as we talk about this, and Mohawk, you briefly touched on this when you talked about LGBTQ friendly groups. And one of the questions I have, maybe for you, Mohawk, and then whoever else wants to jump in, is like, how might someone's demographics impact their experience, whether while doing psychedelics or integrating their experience or preparing, including, and those demographics including race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status?
Yeah, I mean, that's very difficult to actually answer, because, I think all of us, even if we exist within these marginalized communities, we still handle things very differently. you know, so I can't say that, oh, just because you are in this marginalized group and you've experienced this much oppression that you're probably higher likely to have a, you know, a difficult experience than someone who may not have, you know, it's, there's really no way to gauge that. But I do want people to definitely keep in mind that that's a possibility no matter what identity you exist within. And so to especially be cognizant of that, if you have had these types of experiences where something could additionally, like something that might not trigger someone else will trigger you, which, you know, starts to just kind of like underscore what I was talking about before about like, if you are going to be around someone, make sure this person really understands, you know, can really be sensitive to all kinds of types of needs. I did see a question of some sort about a trauma-informed, you know, a trauma-informed experience or integration or something. I mean, you know, like if there's just going to be people who respond to things very differently, you know, people who have CPTSD or something, you know, something might be far more triggering for them than it is for somebody else in the same group. So, you know, I think that, you know, there's a lot of people who are asking about other types of harm reduction. You know, if you are going to be by yourself and you have no other access to anything, and you really want to experience a psychedelic experience, you know, without, maybe you've already looked around and you're just really hitting a dead end and you want to, you know, be able to get some work done. A lot of people don't like to hear stuff like this, but you can kind of stop a trip, you know. There's ways that people there are ways that people, you know, are able to, if things are just way out of control for them and there's no one else that can help ground them. I know that a lot of people tend to use benzos for that. I know that benzos are not going to be accessible to anyone. I've been informed by someone who is a, you know, highly skilled festival medic that Benadryl is like the next best alternative. I would not, if you can, you know, avoid having to do something like that, to basically like chemically force yourself back into like a state of less anxiety, then definitely try to ride it through, because you can learn some really important things. But, you know, a lot of people are going to be by themselves or potentially with someone who doesn't know how to handle that with them. And I also did want to mention, you know, we're talking about, you know, I see a lot of questions and a lot of talk about, you know, choosing people and, you know, rituals for treating like certain types of depression and stuff. I want to be very, you know, I try to like level set with people that you're probably going to have to do this more than once. You know, like there are going to be some people who say they have some breakthrough experience that changes everything for them, good for them. But I've been doing psychedelics for at least a decade and I still use them for maintenance. You know, like you're not always going to have every problem solved. Even, you know, some of the problems that you're working on, like throughout, you know, over a course of a period of time, even in the research that's being done with, you know, these studies, they're not having just one session with psilocybin or one session with MDMA. They're having multiple sessions, and they're doing this to see kind of like, okay, what does this kind of template look like when you are working with someone in a therapeutic or, you know, more medicinal setting. So that's why, you know, earlier on recommended that you can start with more of a threshold dose. Get a sense of like how you sit with this substance before jumping in with some maximum dose. Or even, you know, I'm seeing people mention ayahuasca, like you might not want to touch ayahuasca because that's a very, very intense experience, just because that's the nature of the, you know, the substance. It is very intense. And for some people, maybe that makes them way too uncomfortable, or for at-home use, especially if you're by yourself, I would not recommend using ayahuasca. You know, again, this goes back to what I said very early on, like research the drug. You know, just because you heard about ayahuasca doesn't mean that should be the one you seek out. For those who are interested in, you know, testing, like as a form of harm reduction, you can still order kits online right now. Maybe shipping is delayed, but you can still order kits. To legally obtain a pure substance, good luck. You probably won't be able to, there's no surefire way to do that, but you can definitely do some testing if you feel that the at-home kits are not going to be specific enough. Ecstasy data, or actually they switched over to drugsdata.org. They are a DEA licensed lab here in the US, and I know there are ones in other countries as well that can do you know, higher level drug checking with spectrometers that can basically tell you the entire makeup of the psychoactive components in something that you've procured. Yes, it's not going to be like a 24-hour turnaround, but like if you are invested in this process, like that's a step that I think that everyone should take, is to know what they're actually putting in their body first, not just from like, you know, doing the research about it, but also making sure that they've procured what they thought they had procured with what's available. Because if you're looking for a legal substance, to like a legal psychedelic, like you can go buy this and assure that it's not adulterated. I mean, you're looking at DXM, which is, you know, cough syrup, and that's not going to be for everyone. That's a dissociative. You know, you're looking at, I mean, maybe you would be able to experience some sort of ceremonial use, like, you know, there are things like Native American churches and stuff that have been able to use their First Amendment rights to have freedom of religion, and they use the substance within the religion. So it's like you may be able to have access to that. I can't speak to that, but, you know, that's how a lot of people are able to get around the prohibition, the fallout of prohibition, which is that you are probably going to come across impure substances, unless you live somewhere like Netherlands, where you can basically walk into a store and pick up some stuff. You know, we don't have that luxury here in the United States, and really all of North America, as far as I'm aware of. Well, unless you live in, like, I think it's like Santa Monica. There's like a couple of places where psychedelics have been decriminalized, but decriminalization doesn't mean you can technically sell it. So there still could be some risk there. But yeah, like I do want people to understand that there's definitely some steps you want to take. You might have to do this more than once. I'll even say that you will definitely have to do this more than once, and not to, you know, set your expectations way too high, as if, you know, all your problems will go away with psychedelics use, because a lot of your own problems might not be internal. A lot of things that you're dealing with, you know, we were talking about being in a marginalized community, like you're a queer person, you're a trans person, you are a person of color. Like, a lot of things are happening to us that we have no control over, and there's nothing that a psychedelic can really do to change that. So if you're constantly experiencing some level of discomfort or oppression, I mean, I know for me, waking up every day and checking social media to seeing another trans person of color killed is not very, it's very distressing. Seeing statistics that like 1 in 7 trans women are going to be murdered, like these are things that like we don't have a lot of control over, and it's going to keep happening, and there's nothing that taking a psychedelic will do to necessarily ease that. It might be able to help shift your perspective a little bit to handle it a little bit more gracefully, but that's going to continuously happen. And I just want people to be aware that you might have to continue, you need to prepare yourself to do this more than once when you're dealing with stuff like that. And I know the original question was, you know, kind of speaking to a queer trans experience. Like, I just think that how you handle it is really going to vary, and I can't tell everyone how they're going to react to the substance, because sometimes I don't even know how I'm going to react. And that's why I really have to prepare myself, because I'm like, well, once I go into this, especially if I'm by myself, you know, I don't know, like, hopefully, you know, I think I'm in a good mindset. I think I'm in a safe space, but there still could be something that happens that triggers a response that I wasn't anticipating. And when you're deep enough in, you don't have a lot of control of how to get yourself out of that, which is why I'll always tell people to start with small doses, you know, and you can continue to use small doses. Like, you don't always have to take these massive doses. So I think that those are just things that's just a reality that we should be aware of. Doing work continuously and just keeping in mind that you're, you know, probably not going to have all your problems solved just by taking psychedelics once or a couple of times or anything like that. I think we're dealing with a lot more intergenerational trauma and just trauma in general that's not going to be resolved with something as simple as a use or two.
I think something that is important of what Mohawk mentions is precisely that it's at least from my point of view, it's very important to not generalize and do not come to universal statements about how psychedelics affect certain demographics. I don't know, like I have a very good example. I think it's during the very aggressive colonization process of the Native Americans, certain tribes used peyote in a way in which peyote really lightened up their anger. They became massively aggressive towards the colonizers. They started feeling through the peyote visions that they were coming into a holy war, and they started attacking the colonizers, and they got killed. Another portion of Native Americans using peyote, they actually reestablished their own communities. They connected very much to their own communities, their own processes, and that actually helped them so much to go through the process without disappearing. And I think this is a very good metaphor, because I think that psychedelic use will respond different to context, to very different contexts. I remember also one example in you know, like in Brazil, there was this organization who is using iboga to give to the Black populations who are usually massively marginalized in Brazil. And this researcher is using iboga root to actually help Black populations in Brazil to reconnect with their own cultural cultural heritage and cultural understanding of their identification with their ethnic past. Yeah, sorry. So I think it's very interesting, because what these cases tell us in a certain way is that I think we can use psychedelics to explore our demographic reality, to go into it, to also in a certain way confront it, to maybe psychedelics will give us certain tools, or will help us to have certain tools to accept it in a more wide way, in a more loving way. But maybe that's not necessarily true. Like, maybe it's just going to make us more frustrated, and that I think that depends a lot on our community and the contextual community that we're surrounded by. So yeah, in a certain way, my understanding of, for example, I don't know, like I think a lot about what is happening right now in the last 10 years, at least what I've seen in Europe, and I don't know how is it in the US, but I've seen so many circles of women growing through the empowering of the psychedelic experience, like ceremonies of only women, and this idea of the sacred femininity. And I've seen so much positive response towards the acceptance of womanhood. And I think this is something very beautiful that has been supported by the psychedelic experience and by communities that are very connected between themselves. But that's not necessarily true in you know, like in other communities in which maybe women can't find or don't have access or are too much still under the oppression of machism and toxic masculinity. So I do think that it's a lot about contextual realities.
The word there, Gabriel. It's not one reality. There's so many multiple realities that we're navigating here. And yeah, thank you all for your rich conversation. And I'm learning so much from each of you. And I'm curious, I think that we might, I think it might be time to actually open up for Q&A. Before I do that, I just want to let all of the attendees know that the panelists can't really can't advise around drug access, legal or otherwise. And that's just an important part of, as you're considering what questions to answer the group, that's not something that they can provide information on during this webinar. So Juliana, how would you like to open up the Q&A?
I'm gonna, first for the Q&A, I'm gonna, actually Andrew, you wanted to ask a question to the panelists, I think, right? Do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. So thank you all for this really fascinating discussion. You've kind of opened up addressing a lot of important territory. One of the things though that you've kind of been talking about difficult experiences, and I've been very concerned about the risks of psychedelics during the pandemic, because you know, all of the negative impact of the pandemic, I think, is creating, you know, very difficult experiences without psychedelics. I think, you know, we're often flooded by a mix of intense emotions and that are realistic responses to what we're living through and which we all, you know, are living through. I think that we also, and you know, people have touched on trauma, that I think that the difficult realities that we're living on are also resonating with and sort of kicking up a lot of early trauma for many of us. So this mix is really volatile. And since psychedelics are, you know, amplifiers and kind of open us up even further, I think that they may facilitate access, but they may also make very difficult experiences that can really flood and when not handled correctly, can re-traumatize or further traumatize people. So, you know, I would love to hear people's thoughts and maybe experiences and what you've been hearing from people about how do we understand, I mean, how do you folks understand these difficult experiences? And what are personal practices that people may be able to, I mean, you've touched on some of this, but people may be able to use to kind of move through these difficult experiences and gain something valuable, you know, particularly if people are doing psychedelics alone at home. What are some tips or some practices that, you know, people might find useful?
I think what I was talking before this panel with Benjamin Much. I think he's here. Yeah, he has been posting some questions and comments. Benjamin has been using very particularly, because this is not very common, he has been part of a process of understanding of how to approach the use of microdosing of ayahuasca. And for example, I believe like he has been researching this and noting in a certain way that this is possible to do much more effectively through what I was talking at the beginning, which is the ritualization of a process. And I think ritualization is also very contextual. I think we need in a certain way to develop certain understanding of what ritualizing psychedelic use means. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a spiritual. I remember that at some point Stan Grof was saying that psychedelic use, it doesn't really matter if it's spiritual or not. In a certain ways, already very charged of a spirit, of a sacred significance. And sacredness is not necessarily something that exists only in the realm of the spiritual. I think it is something, it's an attitude towards which we enter, in which there are certain emotions such as respect, such as self-understanding, such as understanding of your own limitations, understanding of the external limitations. So I think this, most of the tips that we can have towards navigating difficult and bad experiences, we can find them in harm reduction guides, which are also in a certain way some sort of ritualization of use. You know, like if we drink a lot of water, we're gonna definitely feel better in the process of the psychedelic experience. And this is a universal truth. But you know, like I also work a lot with Kambo, which is it's not a psychedelic, it's a very different medicine, but it also requires a lot of water intake. And it's in a certain way part of the ritual, you know, like even the people applying Kambo tell you like this is part of a ritual. And I think I remember having a conversation with Bia Labate some years ago, and it was kind of like a difficult conversation because we didn't agree very well in that I was trying to push forward the notion that sometimes harm reduction can be some sort of ceremonial setting. We by following harm reduction guidelines, in a certain way, we are creating a ceremony, maybe a Western ceremony, if we would like to call it like that. Bia didn't agree, but but I think in a certain way it could be something. Yeah, it's a clue around this question.
Yeah, I think what I first of all already liked to hear is, instead of hearing the term bad trips, now we say difficult trips, because difficult isn't bad. It is, but it's hard. So I think when we have when in times of COVID, we are definitely working with so many more issues. But then generally we are also working with, you know, with our lives, economy, maybe, you know, our jobs are uncertain. There's so much uncertainty, and uncertainty can be very difficult in the psychedelic trips. So we kind of need certain grounding tools that we can create our own toolkit after multiple trips, like Mohawk was also saying. After certain multiple trips, you will realize what works for you and what doesn't, because in the end, it's always, you know, it's not one size fits all, but there are certain steps you can take. So first of all, I would say what I was saying, the red thread, the intentions, why are you doing this? And maybe even have them written down, because then you can, you know, go back to them. Why am I even in this, you know, state and in this moment? I would say make your space as comfortable as possible. Put things around you that, and also in the kind of ritualization aspect, maybe make your altar. Have your candle. Have objects that you know, like talismans, things that will give you some kind of happiness, some kind of grounding, some kind of faith in you know, your reality and your story. I also think it's very important that that you let your emotions flow. You know, cry. Shouting might be a bit difficult, but you know, a pillow. Just let things go out. Don't push them down, because it's you're kind of opening up layers, and these layers may be daunting or scary, but by resisting, by trying to push them down again, it will maybe be even worse. So allow yourself that space of really feeling, especially if you have a sitter with you at that point. It's great, you know, to have that, some physical contact, holding hands, you know, just kind of being able to know that you're not alone in this. I think that's really important. Breath is great. Going back to your breath and just kind of taking some deep breaths, like it allows you to come back to yourself, realize, you know, where you're at. This emotional turmoil will probably still be there, but you will have a bit more resting inside yourself. Then I would also say, if it's possible, don't have, kids, work, certain interferences that maybe will stress you or heighten anxiety, if you are able to have the least stress around you, and maybe even the day afterwards, not having to work or not having to take care of many things, so that it allows you to work with these kind of difficult experiences or well, profound experiences.
And I would just like to add the fact that maybe the most important thing, and this also happens in ceremonial settings, is take care of the dosage. Know your dosage. And I think in the drug world, maybe the dosage is sometimes underestimated, and it's probably the most important thing. Like when you go into an ayahuasca ceremony, and a peyote ceremony, an MDMA therapy, like whatever, the most important thing is how much am I taking? And I think this defines a lot. Like if you're going into a difficult experience and like with yourself, and you are going to take a psychedelics for self-healing, start low.
I'd also like to just quickly add that this could also like be part of the research of what type of psychedelic you choose to use. If you are prone to being, to have high anxiety, you probably wouldn't want to be under the influence of a psychedelic for a really long time. Things will potentially unravel even more the longer that you are, if you're having a difficult experience, or you're just in a position where you have more time for something to go off track for you. And there's, stuff like DMT that's like 5 minutes, and you have an extremely profound experience, or at least some people do. It's not my personal favorite, but I mean, I just know that with something like DMT, and these are all things that you can easily research. A lot of these things are very accessible online, but DMT is about 5 minutes, and you can actually do DMT again after like 15 or 20 minutes. It will still have, with many other psychedelics, your tolerance builds for it very quickly, so you wouldn't be able to have frequent experiences with it, which is why in the beginning when I said that if you take your dose, you choose a small dose, but you might want to wait a little bit of time, like a week or two before trying it again, is because a lot of psychedelics can build tolerance very quickly, and then you find yourself not getting much of the effects with what might be just a gradually higher dose than the one you took before, because your body is basically not responding to it because it's too close together. But with DMT, it's a very different experience. And I've seen people who maybe they didn't quite go deep enough. They didn't go as deep as they wanted to go, so they get a little time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then try again by taking bigger hits or using a larger dose or whatever whatever adjustment that they make. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea, because I think that some people will be very uneasy about doing a psychedelic, and there's been a lot of talk about potential challenging experiences, or some might describe as bad. But the thing about DMT that makes it very unique is that it's extremely short, and for some people that might be much preferable.
Great, thank you for those answers. I want to go to a question that I saw in the chat that also leads into something else that I was thinking about from this panel. Nikki wrote, interested in integration and psychedelic therapists accessible to low-income individuals, if anyone can share. And this also made me think about how can people build their own therapeutic support in their own communities if these things aren't accessible?
I think it's very beautiful that, I think it's very important to understand that we are just actually like coming into a new era of psychedelics, and this is just recently beginning, in which we see a lot of organizations working with racial trauma and psychedelics, gender abuse trauma and psychedelics, sexual abuse trauma and psychedelics, many different specializations of the psychedelic world are opening towards vulnerable populations, minorities, low income, accessibility. And I think, for example, I was talking with some people from the Orient project, and it was really beautiful to see what they are doing, like in really taking into their hearts the mission to make ketamine therapy accessible to vulnerable populations, to low income populations. And I think this is something that we're gonna start seeing more and more. Really, I really hope so. But it's just beginning, and I think we're in that way witnessing a new psychedelic renaissance, which is more focused precisely in understanding the realities and the contextual processes of like the different cultures and different people around the world, and seeing how psychedelics can become accessible and also attend the necessities of these differences, of this diversity. So I would maybe send some of the resources to Juliana so she can send them later. But indeed, there are some new organizations working with psychedelic accessibility, and I think that we're gonna see more and more of them coming, because it's probably right now one of the biggest missions of the psychedelic community.
Another question that I saw that I thought was really interesting is from ASB. They say, how can I do psychedelics without abusing privilege? I identify as a white male.
Silence. Well, again, I would really like to hear the different opinions about that, because I think that's also something in a certain way kind of between personal and also, you know, like in a general way, I think something that we've come to understand, like, you know, like white masculinity has come to the process of understanding that the best thing that we can do is become allies. And being an ally means many things, and most of them are pretty much about just being there to support and to serve. And you know, like in the psychedelic world, I've been hearing a lot the word serving. You know, like I am in a process of serving, and I think, yeah, like my opinion would be that white masculinity right now, what we have to do is to serve, is to be allies of minorities, of diverse populations, and being an ally means a lot. You know, like lowering a little bit the head, not being in the front line, just supporting the processes of people in need.
Okay, I'm gonna go to another question. Let's see. There's a lot of questions in here about really wanting specific info about drug effects and specific resources. So we're gonna send out a resource list, a comprehensive resource list tomorrow about all those things. But would anybody like to turn their video on or sound on and ask a question? You can go ahead.
Just want to mention something about, there is someone posting about microdosing as alternative to pharmaceuticals, and I would just like to answer that if possible. Just saying that that should not happen. I think that it's very important to understand that microdosing is not a way of, you know, like having homeopathic experiences of medicine in which we are healing ourselves through. I think microdosing is also a way of experiencing psychedelics, and that we go through a state of mind, and it's also confrontational, and it's not a pill that we're going to use to suddenly heal ourselves and feel better. It's something that we also need to work through. It's micro, like James Fadiman was precisely saying in one conference, that most people using psychedelic microdosing in the right way, they usually, after a while, they go through as much difficult experiences as in a macro dosing trip, because I think the process is that you are also in an altered state of mind, and you're very sensitive, and you're also going to confront a lot of these emotions, and you need to go through them, not evade them, and not treat them as if you're having a psychiatric pill.
Benjamin, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for this very interesting presentation. I've got a question. So it's a hypothetical question. So if a person's got a history of drug addiction and escaping their trauma and escaping their life experience through using substances, psychoactive substances, whatever that is, then how can they approach the use of a psychedelic for, like, at home through microdosing or through a little ritual at home with a psychedelic? How can they approach that in a way that is for the purpose of healing their trauma? And then how can they discern what they're doing? Are they just getting stoned again, or are they doing proper therapeutic, use of the psychedelic? So how do they discern that?
Thank you, Benjamin. It's quite a difficult question that you're posing. I would say that generally, when we're talking about addiction, one very important aspect is that it's not only the physical aspect of addiction. People are addicted and generally overcome addiction when they are actually wanting to make change. That's very, very important aspect, that they actually are showing up for themselves. So if the person is now wanting to actually make positive steps, I would say that's already a great approach. However, obviously also within the realm of addiction, there's a lot of cheating oneself. So I think you cannot necessarily know from the first get-go that this is the therapeutic method that will be correct for you. Or I would also say that when people are dealing with long-term addiction, that doing it by yourself maybe is not the best way. I think getting certain help, having other people at least seeing you, being able to give you some kind of pointers of how you are, and having something, being able to bounce back and forth certain ideas and expressing your experiences is helpful. If you do choose to do it by yourself, I'm not gonna judge, but I think you have to continuously kind of check on yourself. Am I doing this? Really question yourself. Am I doing this because I think it's great to see fractals and I feel good at that moment? Or is it actually because you want to confront and you want to be working on something? The intention is the key.
Yeah, I actually just want to jump in, even though I'm not a panelist, and answer this, because this is such a hard question to answer, and it's really going to be different for everybody. For myself, as a former opioid dependent person who got out of that with Ibogaine, what I did personally was I didn't touch any substance, I think, for about 2.5 or 3 years, and I was really nervous about it. And when I finally did something, it was under the guide of a practitioner. And it even took a few years after that before I felt comfortable microdosing. I'm not saying that that's the way you gotta go, But I do think that like you need time away from ingesting a substance that's going to change your perception of reality. I think it's good to have that break to reassess what your true motivations are with it, so that you don't, because I've seen a lot of people, it's a slippery slope between like, I'm using ketamine in a healing way, to like, you're actually kind of destroying your life with your ketamine use. Like I've seen these like transitions, and people are under the impression that if substances aren't physically addictive, that they can't be problematic, which is not true at all. And so I think that you just have to be really careful and intentional, and be working with someone, whether it's a therapist or a really experienced friend that you check in with about substance use, and always discuss the substance use with that person, so that you have somebody kind of holding you accountable to your true motivations. I think it's not going to be the same for everybody. And, you know, I don't want to like say that mine is the only right way. But I think it's something that you just really need to be careful about, and to get a lot of support around if you've had problems with substances in the past.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of like piggyback off of what Juliana was saying, because I was going to say something similar. It really varies, and I'm seeing a lot of talk about it in the chat, and I generally agree that, you know, there's a lot of variables there, but if you have access, even if it is just a friend, like I think that you are going to be most successful, and not just with psychedelics, but if this is sort of a recovery process for you, you've had some sort of past with problematic use of some substances, like you might still be in some level of recovery, you know, with the substance. And if you feel like there might be a slippery slope of starting to ingest psychedelics in a very similar pattern, having someone to hold you accountable, like even if it's not a professional, there seems to be a lot of research that suggests that people are more likely to, you know, stay on track with whatever their personal goals are when they have people that are supporting them. And that kind of also goes back to what I was talking about a little bit with, you know, being a personal person who has like marginalized identities. Like we might be in a position to be confronted by certain types of things all the time, these external things that could throw us off. And, you know, it would be very difficult to try to unpack everything and process everything by yourself with a history of, you know, like a severe substance abuse disorder or substance use disorder. So, you know, I would definitely start reaching out to friends, anything you can do if that's where you feel you are, and you feel like you might, you know, find yourself in that type of pattern, just because, you know, I really want people to be able to walk away, like come away from the discussion understanding that like what we say it's, you know, it's like a general guideline, but it's not going to be for like it's these tips and this information is not going to work for every single person. And a lot of times, you know, I know that at least a lot of MAPS's research is available with how they, you know, have like worked with each patient and the dosing that they were trying to use to balance out like where can this person like experience the most positive effects and mitigate some of the negative effects. Like, please do research. We can't always provide everybody with every perfect answer because it's going to vary. And if you've had a history of problematic use, you'll definitely want to consider that you might not be able to do this alone. I know that it's very difficult right now with COVID, but this is something that, if it's something that you really want, then it's something that you should leverage every resource that you can. And that includes like leaning on some of your family or friends or whomever is willing to like help hold you accountable in this journey.
Thank you.
Sarah, did you want to jump in and say something about one of these questions?
Said just to, I think being really honest with yourself. Lisa, you mentioned something about not, cheating yourself, but just being really honest with yourself around your intentions and what you might be trying to avoid or cope with and deal with in that way. And the other piece is, I think it's already been mentioned, but just, well, I'll mention the shame piece. So I think shame is really connected to problematic substance use. If someone is taking something more often or it's interfering with their lives in a negative way. I think that breaking through the shame cycle, we have so much shame in our society around this word addiction or problematic substance use. And you're all speaking to reaching out, whether it's reaching out to a therapist or reaching out to friends or community. And I think in order to do that, it takes working with that shame and recognizing places where we might be holding shame around our struggle or around the way that we're coping and dealing with things. Right now, it's a really challenging time for a lot of people and everyone to different degrees. And so I think just working with that shame, if there's any blocks to reaching out and getting support, or Mohawk, he spoke to accountability, if there's blocks of reaching out to people for that support, I think that what I see with my clients and community is that it really is often related to a sense of not feeling like people can open up and be honest and transparent, first with themselves and then with others.
I think you raised quite a very important point, and I think we as a community can also be working on that, destigmatizing a lot of issues around consumption, substance consumption in itself, then problematic substance consumption. Why are there reasons for, why is a person doing it? And we can also be educating ourselves and others around it, and not be talking about, the addict, the junkie. I think there's a lot of reasons and a lot of good reasons why people start out using a substance in some way. It's not only about escapism, it's about generally a lot of hurt, pain, suffering that a person had in their lives, and they're trying to, cope and work around it in some way. So I think we have to really re-image why problematic substance use can happen, and talk about this, and be more open about the subject. Also, maybe there are barriers and there's a lot of shame, but I think also then we shouldn't put all the weight on the user, but also us opening barriers for others. So you see a friend struggling, talk about it, see what's happening, not trying to categorize so much as, you are a recreational user, you are an addict. I think it can be a gray zone, and we should in the community talk about the potential of psychedelics. Amazing, great, yes, we can create therapy with it, we could potentially, but there's also other sides, and we shouldn't look away from those sides or look away from those people, because in the end they're people. Thanks, Sarah.
And I would recommend very much the book of Andrew Tatarsky,
Yeah,
Harm Reduction in Psychotherapy, to learn more about these subjects.
Well, we're at 8 o'clock, so I know there's some more wonderful questions, but I'm hoping in the near future to create a platform for exchange, so that we can continue these conversations beyond the panels. I want to thank all of the panelists and our moderator, Sarah, for creating this amazing conversation. And what we're going to do is compile a list of resources encompassing guides and therapeutic support resources, and we're going to send them out tomorrow when we send out the recording of the panel. Also, I just want to mention that in September, I'm going to be beginning to co-facilitate a psychedelic integration group for women and non-binary folks with a therapist named Didi Goldpow, who is on our first panel. And we're going to be sending out that announcement soon for date and time. And yeah, thank you. And thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Jen, and the center for supporting me and putting this panel on. And I hope to see you all again in future panels. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juliana and everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Sarah.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. It was great seeing all of you. I want to thank you all for just joining this wonderful process.
So good to see you, Andrew.
Yeah, so good to see you too. And you too, Lisa.